Can I first of all say I thought Alex's presentation was brilliant, moving, and shameful that we should be putting fellow European residents through this process, and our solidarity is revealed. We think it was a straightforwardly racist policy that's being pursued, and the fact that it's being done as part of the Brexit process doesn't excuse it. Can I also convey to you the heartfelt apologies for not being able to be here this evening of Teresa Villiers, I received a message, she was very keen to come, but alas, she's got heavy duties as part of the Alternative Arrangements Working Group, which you may have seen has started its sessions in the last 3 days. It is looking at alternatives to the Irish backstop. They were due to be going to Northern Ireland. Have you been reading the papers? They had been due. Planes were booked, tickets were booked, they were all due to go, meetings had been arranged, but then it turned out that these meetings included meetings with people who actually live in Northern Ireland, who are on the border, farmers, people who have jobs. It was felt that they might be to remain, that they might poison the minds of the alternative arrangements workers, so the flight was cancelled. But I have, on your behalf, a very, very practical suggestion. Do you know, I think the best alternative arrangement is to the backstop and to Theresa May's Brexit deal, stay in the European Union. That is the alternative arrangement that we want. I'm also very open, because I know that there'll be some members of the media here too. I'm very happy to come back, because I love Barnet. I mean, I love Barnet a huge amount. I used to live in Boreham Wood when I grew up. I used to come, the exotic trip to Barnet was coming on the 107 bus. Is the 107 bus still going on? Still comes? Oh, yeah. Well, I used to get off, and then there was a Wimpy, this is back in the 19th century, there was a Wimpy on the corner by Barnet Church. There was no day out that was better than going to the Wimpy at Barnet. Barnet was the exotic life. And so I'd be delighted to come back here again and debate with Teresa Villiers on the issue of Brexit, because she's been ducking debate. She doesn't actually want to meet you. She doesn't want to meet us. This is the biggest democratic decision we will take as a people, probably in our generation. I don't think it's too much to expect your Member of Parliament will be prepared to debate. So I say openly, I'm happy to come here and debate with Teresa Villiers. Are you all happy to come back and watch a debate? Okay, well, let's extend that invitation to you. Can I also say that it's of course a great tragedy that that the Brexiters are going to be descending into hell. I much prefer heaven. However, I understand that Dr. Liam Fox, who I debate frequently on Brexit in TV and radio studios, he is delighted he's going to be consigned to hell. He's absolutely relishing the prospect because it's his first potential trade treaty. He hasn't yet been able to pull any off with any of the 40 countries which he was talking about originally. Apparently there was one in offing with Antarctica, but that is still in preparation. We do have some continuity agreements. Did you notice that we have some continuity agreements? The single biggest advance for Brexit this year is the continuity trade agreement that was signed last week with the Faroe Islands. This is great. There is a picture across the Twitter and everywhere else of Dr. Fox signing the Faroe Islands continuity agreement. You'd think that this was the full version of the treaty that was going to be signed. But with Brexit and with hell, we will have a trade treaty. And he was deeply alarmed because, do you remember the Pope a few months ago announced, Donald Tusk of course is a Pole and is therefore, I presume, the large Catholic community passionately believes in hell, I assume. But there was a weekend, do you remember, where the Pope abolished hell? Remember, he gave an interview to a secular newspaper in Rome where he didn't think he believed that hell existed. And this led to a great crisis in Rome because a large part of the Catholic Church was slightly wondering what was happening to this very rapid revision of key articles of faith. But Dr. Fox was the one who was most distressed because his trade treaty, which was in a process of negotiation, was no longer going to be there, but it is now restored. But this does bring out to you the absurdity of the whole Brexit process. Because let's be clear what's happening when we're talking about Theresa May's deal. All of the promises that we were made 3 years ago, which are of substance, of substantial things, have not been realised. The 350 million for the NHS a week, you remember the bus? Did the bus ever make it to Barnet? Well, it probably didn't because that was too far away from the TV and radio studios in central London, which is where it was mostly supposed to be photographed. The Prime Minister has now agreed a 39 billion exit fee. Now this is leading to a crisis of conscience with the Brexiters, because of course they said that we would pay nothing, and that we would save the 350 million a week for the NHS. So because I spend huge amounts of time in TV and radio studios with my good friends Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage and so on, I have a banter with them. One of my pieces of banter with Nigel is how much would he give the European Union? He doesn't like the 39 billion, because that slightly undermines all the arguments that were being made 3 years ago. So what would he give? And I've kept asking him, would it be 10 billion, 20 billion? You know, we can do it as a game of bingo. 30 billion, what would it pay? You know, what sets of rights, what sets of trade agreements would we get for the money? And he kept saying less. He said he would give them less than 39 billion. And I kept saying, Nigel, that's not good enough. You can't say in a negotiation, I'll give less or more. You've actually, you know, got to sign a figure. So after about the fourth go at this on his LBC show, he finally came up with a number. He said, Andrew, as I was just setting on, Nigel, how much would you give them? He cut me short and said, Andrew, I'm sick to death of you asking me how much I give those Europeans, he said, which is the way that he by and large talks about our fellow European citizens. He said, what I would give them, he said, is a nice round number. 0. He said, nothing. Well, I said, Nigel, that's great. I said that you would give them nothing, because now at least we know what the figure is, so we can debate it. You know, I think we should stay in the European Union. Theresa May thinks we should give them 39 billion. You want to give them nothing. I said, but Nigel, there is a problem. You can't give them literally nothing. I mean, you can't give them 0. And he said, why not? I said, Nigel, there's a problem, a quite significant issue here. Your pension. You know, he's got a £73,000 pension from being a member of the European Parliament for 20 years. Now I said, Nigel, let's, because I always try to be rational, which always irritates him. So let's be rational about this. Nigel, you could donate your pension to the NHS. I said, because we've got to find this 350 million from somewhere. 73,000 a year, at least make some contribution to the 350 million. Are you volunteering to donate it to the NHS? There was a silence at this point, so Nigel wasn't proposing to donate it to the NHS. So I said, well, if you're not going to donate it to the NHS, Nigel, then we have at least got to have an exit fee, which is large enough to pay your pension. I said, you may not want to pay anybody else's pension, all the tens of thousands of others who've worked in European institutions. You may not want to pay the farmers who've got all these farm payments which are due, which is part of the 39 billion, the half-built infrastructure projects across the country which are dependent upon the European Social Fund, and all that, but we've at least got to pay your pension. So I said, what we've got to do, I said, he was getting visibly irritated at this point, I said, we need to work out, Nigel, how many years it is that you intend to live beyond the age of 65. I said, and that is not an easy calculation. Actuaries are paid very large sums for making this calculation. It's particularly difficult in your case, I said, because it depends upon whether or not you become a member of the House of Lords. I said, because, you know, my other joke with Nigel is that I would exchange my seat in the House of Lords for his German passport. That's what we started a year ago. Because you know, I have spies, because I'm a traitor, I have spies in all these European embassies. And he was spied in the German embassy a year ago, filling out consular forms. And so I said, is it true, Nigel, that you're applying for German citizenship? And he wouldn't answer this. And after the third attempt, I got out of him that, when he was visibly irritated when I was starting my line, I will exchange my seat in the House of Lords for your German passport. He said, I wish you'd stop going on about this German passport. He said, I do not have a German passport. He said, I was applying for citizenship for my children, he said. And I said, aha! I said, that explains it. Of course, because his wife is German, so, you know, he is not wanting to be in the vulnerable position of settled status and all of that, so he wanted to make sure that they were going to enjoy all of the rights of being European citizens. So I said, Nigel, that's brilliant. I said, did you succeed? Have you got it? And he said, yes. I said, that's brilliant. I said, it's brilliant that your children have got German citizenship. It's quite interesting that they want it now that you're about to take us out of the European Union and take European citizenship away from you. So, but what we want, Nigel, I said, is for all of the young people in Britain to be able to have German citizenship. I said, so I have a suggestion for you. Why don't you adopt them all, Nigel? And indeed, we have this great organisation called Our Future, Our Choice, which we're mobilising the young up and down the country. Do you remember FEMI? You follow FEMI? You've got lots of others too. Well, they're brilliant at stunts. And the day after I had this exchange with Nigel, they turned up at his house in the morning with adoption papers. He didn't like that one at all. And actually that led, the coda to that particular piece of banter is that when I was next on his show on this one, I said, Nigel, how many have you adopted? I said, because I have this long queue. I said, and when you finished with the young people, I said, I think there are many millions of those who now want to be adopted by you. I said, can I ask you a question about this adoption process? And there was a silence. I'm never quite sure I can go with these things. I said, what is the maximum age at which you will adopt people to become your children for the purposes of citizenship? Because I have a 93-year-old who's very keen to be adopted by you. Will you take them on? The conversation degenerated to that point. But coming back to the point about the money, which is so important, I said to him, we have got to pay your pension. So we've got to work out how many years you're going to live. A key factor in how many years you're going to live is whether you do indeed go to the House of Lords. I said, because there is very serious social science research, may even have been conducted by people at the LSE, but it's reputable, which shows that the simple fact of belonging to the House of Lords adds 15 years to your life expectancy. I mean, you know, people look after you, you dress up in a suit, you get taken seriously when you're 85. I mean, it's great, adds hugely to your life expectancy. So I said, if you're going to become a member of the House of Lords, Nigel, probably we've got to cater on your having at least 40 years of pension, maybe 45 years, and then we've got to multiply that by 73,000. And I said, and we've also got to double the figure. I said, what do you mean double it? I said, because you keep telling us this European Union is hugely bureaucratic and wasteful, so there'll be a huge service fee that they're going to charge. So we've got to put some on top of it. And I said, and there are two other reasons why we've got to sort out your pension, Nigel. The first is that you keep telling us that there's too much European regulation, we want to strip it away. So, it's very important that when you do finally retire, you're not a burden on the state, I said. So we've got to be able to pay your pension. And also I said, otherwise, normally in this situation, I said, people get looked after by their children. But we know you can't be looked after by your children because they're going to be in Germany, I said. Anyway, so the conversation didn't go well at that point. But you can see the significant underlying point to it, which is that a lot of these lies which were told 3 years ago are coming home to roost. The no money to the EU, the 350 million for the NHS is now 39 billion. Do you remember the 7 million Turks who are imminently coming? We're still looking for them. Are they in Barnet? I don't know where. Is this what the report shows? Of course, they never existed. They never will exist because Turkey isn't joining the European Union anytime soon, and if it does, we will agree what the terms are going to be in terms of freedom of movement, and if we're in the European Union, we will have an equal say on them, and so it goes down. We were told, remember, we'd have all of the exact same benefits. Do you remember that from David Davis? The exact same benefits of the single market and the customs union? That was after the referendum. Boris Johnson told us before that we would stay in the single market and the customs union. Do you remember that guy, Daniel Hannan, who said that no one is questioning our right to stay in the single market? Whereas it now turns out that a cardinal feature of leaving the European Union is that we should leave the single market and the customs union. So a whole load of lies were told 3 years ago, and now that they're coming home to roost, we should have, and by the way, a big part of the problem with the BBC is that what it did not do all the way through this process was to act as an impartial state broadcaster. We need big reform at the BBC, because what it did was not to do what an impartial state broadcaster should do, which is to call out the lies and substitute for them the truth. What it did was to give equal airtime to the lies, and then it thought that it was being balanced if it allowed those of us who were telling the truth to come in afterwards. We don't want any more of that in the next referendum campaign either. So there are a lot of things that need to be changed. And we need the people's vote, because now, three years later, we have got the withdrawal agreement, 580 pages, and you've all read it, haven't you? You can tell me what's in it. The 30 pages of the political declaration. We didn't have that before. I spent a lot of time in this process in Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland is, of course, going to be trashed by Brexit because of the big issues to do with the border. And when 20 years ago we had the Good Friday Agreement, which is probably the single best thing that we've done in this country over the last 25 years, and all tribute both to John Major, who started it, and to Tony Blair, who finished it, and to successive Irish Prime Ministers, and to all the political parties. A phenomenal thing. The idea that we should be thinking of turning the clock back to 20 years ago and to a recurrence of the Troubles is absolutely monstrous and unthinkable. But I've spent a lot of time in discussions in Northern Ireland. I did visit the border. I wasn't afraid to meet the people who would tell me what the reality was going to be if we have a hard border. And what they told me was not only was there a real danger of any move towards a harder border precipitating a return to the Troubles, and they told me why, which is because if you have differential customs, tariffs and immigration rules at that border, you will start getting serious smuggling. The smuggling will be run by the paramilitaries, as it was back in the 60s and 70s, which was a large part of the reason why the Troubles started in the first place. And it will be an instrument of control by the paramilitaries, and it will also be a massive instrument of money for the paramilitaries too, which is the reason why you will have to have either fixed border infrastructure, which is a real danger of that being shot down, which is what happened again back in the 60s, or mobile infrastructure, which means soldiers and the police routinely stopping cars, vehicles, trucks, and searching them. And that is an absolute surefire way of getting a return to serious conflict in Northern Ireland. So what is the right thing to do? It's not to do it. But when I was there, they told me about the referendum. Because remember, there was a referendum in Northern Ireland on the Good Friday Agreement. Indeed, there was a referendum in the Republic of Ireland too. It produced an overwhelming majority in the Republic of Ireland, but it produced a three-quarters majority in Northern Ireland. And in that referendum, a copy of the Good Friday Agreement was sent to every voter in Northern Ireland. And I know, because they all regarded it as so serious, they read it. Lots of people told me about it. It said what was going to happen to the decommissioning of weapons, to the organisation of the border, to citizens' rights, all of these issues which were covered in the Good Friday Agreement. And what somebody said to me, one of these meetings which lodged in my mind, is, Lord Adonis, when we had the referendum on the Good Friday Agreement, a copy was sent to every voter in Northern Ireland. That surely is a reason why we should have a referendum on Theresa May's treaty, because a copy should be sent to every voter in the United Kingdom. So for the first time, people are actually voting on an actual proposition to leave. And I think that's completely right. It completely makes the case for this second referendum. In the first referendum, we couldn't know what the terms of departure were going to be because there were no terms. There couldn't be any terms because there hadn't been any negotiations. Now there are, we should have the referendum. And I pray in aid on this one, my good friend Jacob Rees-Mogg. Because Jacob, remember, back in 2012 when he was trying to persuade David Cameron to do the referendum, which was instrumental in getting Cameron to come out for it in 2013, Jacob said, to meet the point about how would you deal with the fact that people wouldn't know what they're voting on, he said we should have what he called, and it's in Hansard, and I like quoting it, he doesn't like it, but it's there, he said we should have a dual referendum. A dual referendum. And the dual referendum would be first a referendum on opening negotiations with the European Union on departure so we could generate terms, and then, having done that, we would then have a second referendum on those terms. Now, do you know what I really like? I love Jacob Rees-Mogg's dual referendum. That is what we want. That is why we should have a people's vote, and it's in aid also of the argument of the people of Northern Ireland who rightly said that having a referendum on a concrete proposition is what helped produce a stable and shared consensus of view in Northern Ireland, and I think we should do the same here, and it is an overwhelmingly strong argument for a people's vote, and it should happen sometime this year. So, I'd almost like to say my welcome, but let me just very quickly run through when we have that people's vote. And by the way, I still think there's a good chance of us getting it, because I've always thought the reason we would have a referendum is that when all else has failed, that would be the lifeboat we get into. Theresa May is going to have her second meaningful vote, she may have her third meaningful vote. There's no sign it's going to go anywhere. There isn't any alternative arrangement on the backstop, so that's not going to go anywhere. Norway, there isn't the makings of an agreement on a Norwegian type deal, because she would lose half her party if she tried to do that. If she moves to the centre, she loses all the right. If she moves to the right, she loses the centre. That is the basic predicament that she's in. I think it's perfectly possible we'll have to extend Article 50, because there's no way that we're going to be ready to leave in 7 weeks' time. So I think what will happen is that the can will be kicked down the road. We will have a terrible period of further instability and alarms and excursions. But I think ultimately, once all of the other options have been tried, we will have the referendum on the Sherlock Holmes principle, and one of his stories, that once all the impossible options have been eliminated, you are just left with the improbable, which must be the truth. And that's how I think we will end up with a second referendum. But what then... what then are the four big arguments that we're going to use in the referendum? Let me just run through them briefly, and then let's have questions and discussion. Firstly, don't trash our trade, our economy and our jobs. All of those arguments in Project Fear, supposedly, were correct. They were correct. They are happening at the moment. It is why Nissan is going to start moving production abroad. It's why Sony is moving to the Netherlands. It's why report after report shows reduced economic growth figures. It's why we've moved from the top of the EU growth league to the bottom. All of this is true. It was the only respect in which it was incorrect was that, of course, at the point after the referendum, most people did not believe we were going to leave. So there was a suspension of disbelief for a period, but now that it's becoming coming across the horizon, it's all becoming true. But the truth of the matter is, 45% of our trade is with the EU. On the principle, which is the first rule that all students learn in trade economics, that trade halves as distance doubles. It is great common sense, but it's common sense, it's the real world, which is the reason why we have more trade with the Republic of Ireland than with China, not because the Republic of Ireland, of course, is larger, but because it's closer. We share a 250-mile border with it, and so on. All of that trade will be potentially trashed if we leave the EU, because the act of putting in customs duties, bureaucratic impediments, obstacles at the port can only lead to what Theresa May herself uses in her anodyne language, less market access. Less market access means fewer markets in which to sell our goods, more impediments to trade, which means less well-paid jobs and fewer jobs. It is that simple. And Liam Fox has to replicate the entirety of the single market and the customs union for us not to be worse off, and he hasn't even begun to do that at the moment. But it's not just the 45% of our trade with the EU. Another 15% of our trade is with 73 other countries with which the European Union itself has bilateral trade agreements, including Canada, including South Korea, including latterly Japan. The Japanese free trade agreement came into force on the 1st of February. All of that has to be replicated and at least matched, otherwise we're worse off. And that is before we get to Liam Fox's trade treaty with Antarctica, Hell, New Zealand, Australia, and so on. So what is the right policy if you don't want to trash our trade? It's not variants of Brexit. It's not Theresa May's deal, which admittedly is slightly better than no deal and all of that. It is to stay in the European Union. And as those facts become clearer, and we cannot have our cake and eat it, people are coming to realise the impact that Brexit will have on them. Argument 2, why we need to stay in. Ireland. The reason why we have to have the backstop, because it's very, very complicated. The 570 pages of the withdrawal agreement, about half of it is on the operation of the backstop. It's extremely complicated about how this arrangement is going to work. But the essence of it, because all complicated things in life can be simplified, the essence of the backstop is very simple. If Great Britain is going to be leaving the customs union, the single market, and most of the rules of the European Union as a matter of political decision, which would necessitate a hard border in Northern Ireland. It would necessitate it because you'd have different customs, trade and immigration rules on either side of the border. Then in that eventuality, and it has to be a backstop because we haven't even begun to negotiate the long-term relationship that we'll have with the EU yet. That all comes way after the end of this implementation period and isn't even covered in the 580 pages. In that eventuality, to all intents and purposes, Northern Ireland will stay in the European Union. Now, this is highly problematic because the ERG, which I've dubbed the Economic Ruin Group, but I'm told it has another name, the ERG, it didn't take them long to clock that if Northern Ireland stays in the European Union in order not to have a hard border with the Republic of Ireland, then what does this mean to the integrity of the United Kingdom? I mean, it's an unanswerable problem. The only answer is either you waive all the rules inside the UK, which would be, again, an invitation to massive smuggling in from Europe into Great Britain and all of that, or you have a border down the Irish Sea. So the people who claim to be the Unionist party will be the people who destroy the Union. Now, there is a big problem on this if you're not going to have the backstop. You then do have to have an alternative arrangement. And they have offered some alternative arrangements. Some are not going to get past first base, because they completely undermine the backstop, which is a time-limited backstop, which is one suggestion which is out there at the moment. The other one is that we should have a unilateral right to withdraw from the backstop. You can imagine how that's going down with our friends in Ireland. But Jacob, when I do my discussions with him, Jacob has come up with the only alternative arrangement I can see that could actually work. Jacob's solution is that, and wait for it, Ireland should also leave the European Union. Now, you've got to give it to him. There is a logic to this, because don't follow the logic through, because you have to follow the Rees-Mogg. He's a bright guy. If Ireland leaves the European Union at the same time as the United Kingdom leaves the European Union, and we both pledge to have exactly the same immigration, trade, and international rules, then it is true that we don't need to have a hard border in Ireland. There is a slight problem with this. Have you spotted the problem? It's called neocolonialism. We've been there with Ireland before. It did not work. Not only did it not work, it led to war between us and Ireland. It is the reason why the Republic of Ireland is Republic of Ireland, not part of the United Kingdom. But it is deeply, deeply revealing of a mindset which goes to the heart of Brexit, which is somehow everything would be better if we could turn the clock back. If we could turn the clock back 50 years to Dunkirk, or 100 years to when Ireland was part of the United Kingdom, or 150 years to when the British Empire was at its peak. But can I let you into a secret? In life, you can't turn the clock back. It doesn't work. And also, it wasn't great then, either. The idea that this would be a nirvana is, of course, for the birds. But it does lead to my banter with Jacob, which I'll tell you, because it's been a bit too serious in the last 5 minutes. You know when President Macron came a year ago and paid his state visit to Britain, and he lent us the Barnet tapestry, which is going to be on display in the British Museum next year, which is fantastic. We're all going to go and see it. He asked Her Majesty the Queen for a return gift for the people of France. And I have made a suggestion to Her Majesty as to what our return gift should be. In return for the very generous loan of the Barnet tapestry next year, which is going to be on display in the British Museum, we should offer the people of France Jacob Rees-Mogg. And what we should do, because, let's be clear, he represents the best and the worst of Britain in many centuries, and he should go on display in the Louvre. Immobile, with the pinstripe suit, the watch chain and all of that. And it'll be, people will queue and pay very serious money, I'm sure, to see this English eccentric. You go back many centuries. Okay. However, because I have to keep this banter going, I said to Jacob in my last confrontation with him that I had some news for him. I just received a communication from the Élysée Palace. Alas, with huge regret, President Macron cannot accept Jacob, on the grounds that the Barnet tapestry is considerably more recent. But you get the point, don't you? The stop Brexiter argument in all of these things is if we turn the clock back, everything would be better. To this great period when Britain ruled the waves, when we were a country that didn't have to start dealing on a basis of equality with these countries who we supposedly defeated in the war and all of that. But it's not going to work. And in Ireland, the alternative arrangement that will work, which is the one that we should do, is very simple: stay in the European Union. Do not trash our relations with our nearest neighbour with all of the untold damage and potentially bloodshed that could do in the future, as it has done in the past. And these issues are deadly serious. I grew up, like many of you, in the 1970s and 80s, when London was beset by IRA bombs. I lived then in, moving from Bournemouth into Camden Town. I was in Regent's Park on the day in 1981 where the bomb went off in the bandstand of Regent's Park, which killed 9 World Green Jackets and maimed 20 others. This was not, this was a deadly, appallingly serious situation. We brought an end to it. Let's not do anything that in any way reduces the stability of Northern Ireland. Third reason why we should stay in the EU is young people. Now, I never meet young people in any groups of more than 2 or 3 when I do meetings of students and sixth formers. I do a lot of them at the moment. In an audience of this size of sixth formers or there'll be no more than 2 or 3 who will tell me that they're in favour of Brexit. The overwhelming majority are against Brexit. They want a second referendum, and they also want votes for 16 and 17-year-olds because their future is more at stake than anyone's, so they want much more of it. The killer line line came from the guy who said in one of the meetings I did recently, when I was starting to do my spiel on why this was going to trash the future of the young. They said to me, Lord Adonis, what you're saying to us basically is we do not want to be shut up on a small island with Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson. And you know, I agree. I don't want to be shut up on a small island with those three either. But what is the reason why it trashes the future of the young? It is because now, at this point, we are citizens of 28 nations, not just one, and this means for young people who are looking at forging their career, they have the right to work, live, settle, and conduct business and forge relationships across all 28. And what Brexit will do is reduce that overnight to 1. And when Alex talked so movingly about the 3 million, let's also remember there's the 1 million. Those are the UK citizens who live on the continent of Europe and who have every bit as much of a right to have the government of this country safeguarding their interests as the 3 million should expect us to safeguard their interests too. And the idea that we should say to the next generation, after 75 years of peace and prosperity in Europe, we are going to trash your right to forge careers across Europe and start introducing arbitrary rules like Theresa May's, if you earn under 30,000, you're not going to be able to come here, which also means, because these rights are reciprocal, that if you earn under 30,000 and you're a Brit, you will not be able to work on the continent either. This is completely monstrous and we should reject it outright. So, we should stay in the EU to safeguard our jobs and economy, to safeguard our relationship with Ireland, and to safeguard the future of our young. But the fourth and final reason why we should stay in the EU is the one we didn't talk about enough 3 years ago, but I think is actually the fundamental reason, which is the European Union is the best peace project in the entire history of Europe. In the 70 years where the European Union has been in existence, there has been not one single war between two member states of the European Union. That is the only 70 years in the entire history of the continent of Europe where that is true. If you look back at the entire history since Europe has existed as a recognisable continent with recognisable countries in it, which is about 1,000 years, there is no period of 70 years when there aren't wars. There aren't many periods, even of 10 or 20 years, that there aren't wars. And some of the wars, if you go down on Wikipedia, there's a list of European wars. Some of these wars, like some of the wars in the Balkans, have gone on, and some of the wars in the declining Ottoman Empire have gone on for centuries long. Let's be blunt. Let's be very blunt and honest about this. Essentially, the war between the English and the Irish went on for many centuries. Henry VIII, Cromwell, the Irish famine, the late 19th century, the Irish wars of liberation and so on. It's not a pretty story. The European Union is a phenomenal peace project for two reasons. Firstly, because the European Union is an association of democracies. It is a requirement to be in the European Union that you should be a democracy. Now, let's be blunt. If you look at the existing list of 28 countries, in 1945, only 3 were recognisable democracies. All 28 are. Now, some are better than others, that's true. I'm not a great fan of Mr. Orban, and I think we should be much tougher on him, by the way. And meanwhile, by the way, remember, Conservative MEPs were voting against motions of censure on Orban because we might need his support for Brexit. So I don't need to take any lectures from those who want Brexit about maintaining fundamental human rights. The best way of maintaining fundamental human rights across the whole continent of Europe is for us to remain in the European Union, arguing for our values in the EU, not cheering them. But the second reason why the EU has been such a phenomenal peace project is because not only is it a club of democracies, but one of the requirements for coming into the EU is that you should guarantee your borders. It's a requirement. And the cause of many of the wars, indeed probably most of the wars, one way or another, across Europe in times past, is wars which start as border disputes because of ethnic groups which, by the very nature of Europe, straddle nations. Indeed, these have been, the frontier lands of Europe, which is about half of Europe, one way or another, have been the source of conflict, hegemonic ambitions, and huge and embittered and armed ethnic rivalries in Europe. And they still are today. Just look at what's going on in parts of the Balkans even today. The European Union, a requirement is that you must be a democracy, You must guarantee your borders, and because this is so effective a peace project and so effective an economic project, it has completely dissipated war in Europe. But we should not take it for granted, because just look at what's happening on the borderlands of Europe today, and you see how real the threat of war is. Russia, Putin, who is basically a fascist straight out of the 1930s, he has already invaded one European state, actually two, Georgia, and Ukraine. He is occupying a large part of Ukraine at the moment, the Crimea. And why? Because what was it the Ukraine wanted to do at the point at which Putin came in? It wanted to do two things. It wanted to join the European Union and it wanted to join NATO, seeing the two as two sides of the same coin. What should have happened is we should have stood by Ukraine. We shouldn't have allowed the invasion of the Crimea to take place, and I think we may pay a very, very heavy price for showing weakness in the face of Putin. But the other area where you have at the moment a real serious danger of conflict is the Baltic states, where you have three tiny states about the size of Wales, each of them at the moment in terms of population, with very large Russian minorities because of this issue of ethnic groups and borders and all of that. A large part of those Russian minorities were planted there by Stalin in the most appalling acts of brutality in the 1940s and 50s, so it's a potential flashpoint all of the time. But all three of those states, because of wise policy in the 80s and 90s, belong to NATO and belong to the European Union. And when I met the President of Estonia recently, because Britain is leading the military manoeuvres in Estonia to stand by the country to warn the Russians against an attack, and I gave him my blather about everything will be fine, we will stand by you, it doesn't matter about Brexit, it will be fine. He just cut me short and said, Lord Adonis, the two things I worry about when I wake up every morning, he said, are Trump and Brexit. Trump, because one tweet could lead to the invasion of my country, or one bilateral meeting between Trump and Putin with just an interpreter present, and you can well understand that. And he said, Brexit, because anything that lessens the commitment of Britain to the continent of Europe will weaken our security and could well lead, as in times past like the 1930s, to serious miscalculations by the strong men of Europe, and in particular, of course, Putin. And the truth is, he's right. The truth is, we will be weakening European security by leaving the European Union. We will be weakening our own security by leaving it. We will be encouraging the Trumps and the fascists and others, and there are plenty of them around, to think that they might be able to chance their arm. And when the Atlantic Alliance depends upon a president of the calibre of Trump, that is even less reason to want to do this. And that finally, because I've spoken for too long, leads back to the very creation of the European Union. Because in this great book, which I'm busy dispensing copies of afterwards, called Saving Britain, which I did with Will Hutton, and all of the proceeds are going to enable young people from deprived backgrounds to volunteer or study in Europe, because part of my explanation of why we're in this mess at the moment is too few young Brits actually have real experience of living on the continent and forging friendships and knowledge of the continent there. But in the book I set out the history of the EU, which is so important to understand, because the history is bound up in what Churchill, in his great Zurich speech of 1946, when he called for a kind of United States of Europe, and he said we should form a kind of United States of Europe, by which he meant we, the British, should take the lead, not they should form it. But the bedrock of it was the promotion of peace and stability between France and Germany, which was an incredibly radical idea in the mid-1940s, because many people thought what we should do is to disarm Germany, carve it up, and keep it in a state of subjection, which of course would have been a short-fire way of provoking another war in due course, like the Versailles Treaty. And this idea of partnership between these countries and friendship and shared institutions was very radical. And when you go back to the founding treaties, which tragically we didn't sign, which is part of the reason why we've been half in, half out ever since, and we're in this predicament of Brexit now, the founding treaties of the European Union all talk about peace, stability and harmony. And the first of them is the Treaty of Paris of 1951, only 6 years after the end of the cataclysm of the Second World War. The Treaty of Paris is the treaty that set up what was then the coal and steel community, which shared coal and steel markets between the original 6 members, which then led in due course to the common market and to the single market and to the European Union as we've got today. But the opening section of the Treaty of Paris doesn't talk about coal and steel at all. What it talks about is peace, war, and civilization. And I just want to read it to you in conclusion, because it brings home the stakes in this Brexit argument we're having at the moment. The President of the French Republic, the President of the Federal Republic of Germany, the Prince Royal of Belgium, the President of the Italian Republic, the Grand Duchess of Luxembourg, the Queen of the Netherlands, considering that world peace can be safeguarded only by creative efforts commensurate with the dangers that threaten it, convinced that the contribution which an organised and vital Europe can make to civilization is indispensable to the maintenance of peaceful relations, resolved, and these words are amazing for an international treaty, resolved to substitute for age-old rivalries the merging of their essential interests to create, by establishing an economic community, the basis for a broader and deeper community amongst peoples long divided by bloody conflicts, have decided to create a European coal and steel community. That's the reason why we created the European Union 70 years ago. It's the reason why it's every bit as relevant today in 2019. It's the reason why we should campaign until the last opportunity has gone to stay in the European Union. And it's the reason why I am absolutely convinced we will succeed. Thank you very much. The best guarantee against having war in Europe is to maintain and strengthen the European Union. It has been a phenomenal success at doing that. And if you want to look at the parts of Europe where we've had wars, and they have been terrible wars, an appalling civil war in the former Yugoslavia, which happened in our lifetimes, which happened there with the collapse which was brought about by bitterly rival ethnic groups. It was on exactly the same basis as I described earlier, with Europe intervening too late, actually. I think it's the general view is that if we intervened sooner, once the bloodshed started, we might have been able to stop it. The best thing that is happening in the former Yugoslavia now is that country by country, the constituent countries of the former Yugoslavia are now joining both the European Union and NATO. And do you know what I think should happen? They should all join, and the sooner the better, so that there's no possibility of a recurrence of the war that happened there. So I think we probably just disagree about the ambitions. But we're talking here about, hold on, we're talking here about the European Union and whether the European Union should do. On the issue, can I say, because the underlying point is the issue of the European army, which is the point underlying it. Let's be clear, we do have a European army at the moment. It is called NATO. It has underpinned our peace since the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation in 1949. The reason, we need to be very honest about this, the reason why the debate is there about whether we should have stronger European institutions in the military sphere is because of the escalating threats that the United States will withdraw. And if they do withdraw, given that many of our European colleagues spend very, very little on defence at the moment, we could leave our continent highly, highly vulnerable to invasion, attack from outside, which is not hypothetical because, as I said, President Putin, and very likely any nationalist successor of his, has already tried it. So I think if one's looking at this analytically, you always need, any country needs to be properly defended, and I make no apology at all for supporting proper defence, but trading, you know, Churchill, jaw is better than more war, intensifying trade, intensifying the ties which bind us together in the European Union, continuing to promote human rights, democracy, respect for borders, all of those things, that is the best conceivable prospectus for maintaining the peace of Europe that we could possibly have. And anything we do to weaken it risks the possibility of conflict in Europe. So I don't think that that's a fair criticism. On the other points that have been raised, Article 50 and how long might it be extended for? It looks to me as if it's almost inevitable it's going to be extended for 3 months, come what may, because we're just not ready to leave at the moment. So The question is whether it needs to be extended for longer, and that is very difficult because of things like the European elections and so on. But I think we should certainly go for 3 months and then see where things go thereafter. I think our European partners will start expecting to see some evidence that we've actually got a plan for getting out of this mess. And we'll need at that stage to develop it. We have got a plan, by the way. You know what our plan is? Hold a second referendum with an option to remain, and then we put an end to this whole nightmare. But there doesn't seem to be a better plan at the moment. Theresa May's plan is, having lost her first meaningful vote, to hold a second meaningful vote, and then a third meaningful vote. But I think that will run out of steam in due course. Can I address, though, this issue of leadership, which is really serious? And my basic response is to agree with you. Let's be clear at the moment. Theresa May is, if you order the worst prime ministers that this country has had in the last 250 years, I'm not sure which of the top slots that she takes, but it's one of them. No vision for the country, no plan for getting us out of this mess, and no inspiration for the British people. But I don't think, because let me be self-critical, I don't think that the leader of my party has been great either. I think there's been a great dearth of national leadership at the moment. The problem is, it's very difficult for the House of Commons, which is where the supreme power in our political system lies, but being a body of 650 people, it's very difficult for a corporate body like that to take charge. But there are plenty of very effective leaders out there who I think, come a referendum, will play a very prominent role. Let me give you some of them. John Major, he has played an absolute blinder through all this, and he, I think, will be our secret weapon with that parts of provincial Conservative England, which actually holds him in great respect and wants a Conservative leader who talks plain common sense, which we just haven't had over recent months. I'm also hugely impressed by Caroline Lucas. I want more Caroline Lucas. I never thought I'd hear myself saying this, but I think Nicola Sturgeon has been good too. I think more Nicola Sturgeon. She's been standing up rightly. And by the way, what she says, which is of course potentially hugely important for this whole debate, she says, if Northern Ireland gets the backstop, why shouldn't Scotland have it if it wants it? A very good question. Indeed, what I say is, England may want the backstop too. It's called staying in the European Union. So, I like that bit too. My party has plenty of good people in it. You know, Hilary Benn, Yvette Cooper, I could go through the list of people. But they need to be able to come to the fore, and I think in a referendum campaign they will come to the fore. So I don't think we're going to have one single leader. I think it'll be a kind of collective leadership. I want to see more young people coming through as leaders too, which is important. We need many more of them, because I think that this referendum fundamentally will be won by the young, mobilising the young. I think that's going to be hugely important. So have confidence. We can win this. We do have leaders. We are better than the two not particularly good leaders that we have of the two mainstream parties at the moment, but we have got to mobilise a majority in the House of Commons to get the referendum in the first place, and that's why these parliamentary Labour and Conservatives councillors in Barnet. If Theresa May agrees to do the debate with me on Brexit here, I think all of the councillors should be invited too, and we can take as long as it takes. I'm very happy to have hours of this debate. Can I give a commitment? As far as I'm concerned, there will be no guillotine on the debate at all. If you want to spend 6 hours doing it, it's fine by me. I will stay for 6 hours. There you are. There's my offer. On the question was asked about what I said about Labour Brexiters. Can I be, because this is a real issue that goes to the heart of what's going on in my party at the moment, and I think I should address it. What happened, it was very telling, it was on the Ian Dale phone-in, and there was an extremely persistent questioner who phoned in, who said that they were a Labour voter, they said. They wanted to lead the customs union, the single market. They thought that we needed to be out of all these things European. And what did I have to say to them? And I said, well, what I would first of all seek to do is to persuade you that that's not the right thing, I said. And he said, no, I've decided I definitely want to go. He said, it's the thing that really matters. So I said, well, if what you really want to do, if the thing that really matters to you above all in politics is leaving the single market and the customs union, I have to tell you, a Labour government would not do that. And so if that's what you want, you should vote for someone else. Now, do you know what I think about this at large? If you are a political leader, and we had this point about political leadership earlier, you cannot forever sit on the fence. You cannot say, case one way and say that we're going to have the exact same benefits of the single market and the customs union, but we're going to leave it. Excuse me, if you want the exact same benefits of the single market and the customs union, you stay in the single market and the customs union, you don't leave it. You cannot say that we want all of the benefits of freedom of movement that we heard earlier. You cannot say we want those, but then leave the rules on freedom of movement. You cannot say we want to have influence and partnership with our European colleagues and safeguard our security, and leave the security institutions of the European Union. You cannot do those things. And we need to be frank and honest with people. And my belief is, if we'd been franker and honest with people in the past, and made the positive case for Europe, we would not be in this mess in the first place. And the big problem, because I'm busy, I'm so prolific at the moment, so I feel so passionate. I've done a book which I've also bought some copies along, called Half In, Half Out, which is an account of prime ministers and Europe since 1945. And the big problem we've had as a country, and I need to be completely frank with you, is apart from, ironically, Winston Churchill, who said at the outset we should create a kind of United States of Europe, and actually Margaret Thatcher, who signed the Single European Act and offered stronger and better British leadership in Europe than any other prime minister since the war, besides Winston Churchill. Apart from those two leaders, and of course Edward Heath, who took us in, but then he left office very soon afterwards, our big problem is that we have had a whole succession of political leaders and prime ministers who have been half in, half out, have never made an unambiguous case for membership. So surprise, surprise, where is the British public? Half in, half out. And as Euroscepticism, courtesy of Nigel Farage and the appeasement which David Cameron gave to all of those forces, surprise, surprise, where did the British people go? They gravitated in that direction too, which is why we ended up with this 52-48 vote. It is my view, though, that if we have leaders who tell the truth, who are completely honest about the real choices that face the country, and who put their have some courage about leading, including, let me be blunt about it, because I have huge respect for some of my Conservative colleagues in Parliament who are leading, people like Dominic Grieve, Anna Soubry, Sanjay Mark, who are leading despite being threatened with deselection in their constituencies at the moment because the extreme English nationalists have taken control of these Conservative associations. If we lead in that way, my belief is that we will persuade British people, including Labour voters in the Midlands and the North, that the right thing to do to safeguard our jobs, to safeguard opportunities for our young people, to safeguard the position in Ireland, and to safeguard peace is to stay in the European Union. Shall I do some of the questions briefly? We aren't going to be obliged to join the euro. We have an opt-in to the euro if we choose to do so in the future, but nobody will oblige us to do so. However, if we leave the European Union and have to reapply to join, at that point we may have to join the euro, join everything else that we've at the moment got preferential arrangements on, not get the rebate. The right thing to do is, of course, not to leave, so we don't put in jeopardy what is the great deal we've got at the moment. Do I think that there should be conditions on the extension of Article 50? Definitely. And the European Union should insist on that so that we don't have this merry-go-round continuing. Do I think we need to get the rules better for the next referendum? Definitely. We need a few things to be sorted out. We need tighter spending limits. We need a watchdog that actually acts as a watchdog. We need to regulate social media that wasn't regulated last time and was the kind of Wild West of the campaign. We need one campaign for each side, not two, as we had last time, with two Leave campaigns which were saying contradictory things, and one of which was a kind of mainstream Conservative campaign, and the other was the Wild West with Nigel Farage. And we also need the BBC to do its job of being an impartial state broadcaster. We need all of those things. And yes, we do need the National Crime Agency to get through what happened 2 years ago. Obviously, Cressida Dick doesn't tell me what she's up to, so I've got no idea what the timescale would be, but it has taken them a long time to do this, and it would be good if they could bring those investigations to a conclusion. But can I deal finally with these issues about what should our message be to congratulate the new Labour candidate for chipping Barnet, and the issue about how we then win the campaign. We need next time a positive and enthusiastic message about Europe if we're going to win the referendum next time. And what should it be? Europe works. Let's be clear. It has been a huge success in the last 70 years, and we shouldn't put it in jeopardy. How do we win it though in a serious way? My own view is that there will be a business about people changing their mind, and I'm delighted to hear that we've got some people who voted leave last time who will change, and they will change because the facts come through. But the crucial difference next time, I think, will be the mobilisation of younger voters. I think the turnout amongst the young was low last time. A quarter, according to the Electoral Commission, a quarter of 18 to 24-year-olds are not even on the electoral register. Can I tell you, I think that is shameful that so many young people aren't even part of the democratic process, let alone casting their votes. And we also need, as I say, votes for 16 and 17-year-olds. If you just do the maths on that, if we get high turnout amongst young people, we get young people registered in the way that they should be, we have votes for 16 and 17-year-olds, that is millions of new voters who will be predominantly, because it's in their profound view of their own self-interest and their view of the future to do so, who I think will vote to remain.